So I'm very glad to have Venugopal here, speaking with us, speaking virtually. Yeah, he's in India, obviously, speaking with us about the revolutionary movement in India, and in particular, some of the history of the student aspect of that revolutionary movement. And Venugopal is a journalist and has been involved, as he puts it in his book, as a participant observer in the movement in various ways. Over the last several decades. For those who aren't familiar with his book, it was published a few years ago. Was it 2014, 2013? Understanding Maoists. You can find it online, and it's quite good. It contains a number of important essays talking about everything from the history of the debate over the semi-feudal, semi-colonial question to articles he wrote about Azad and Charabanda Raju and others. And I'm very excited to have him here today, both to speak about the movement in India, because there's real importance for those of us in the US and around the world to learn from the movement in India, both in terms of understanding the lessons from it and supporting it in various ways, given the semi-feudal and semi-colonial nature of India, and that it's oppressed by various imperialist powers, especially the United States, supporting it in the spirit of proletarian internationalism, but also because there's immense lessons from the movement in India for us in the US to learn from. There's a lot over the last 50 years of the twists and turns of revolutionary struggle. There's a lot to take stock of, a lot to learn from. And in particular, I know a number of people are joining tonight from a number of different Marxist studies around the country. I'm very glad to have you all here. And I hope that Venugopal's remarks, although about a different situation, will provide us with some insight into different things to consider in our own theory and practice. And I'll just mention that briefly, and I'll mention again at the end, but for those who do want to stay in touch, there's a number of Marxist studies that have started on campuses around the country that are coordinating to bring together this event tonight. And so those people want to start one in their own location, whether it be on a campus or otherwise, would be glad to be in touch. So without further ado, and Venugopal is going to take it away. Oh, and again, just to mention, sorry, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll do a Q&A at the end. So we'll go through those.
Good evening, comrades and friends. Actually, for me, it's good morning. It's early morning in India. And thank you, everybody, for joining this program organized by Ryan and friends. This is basically about the students' movement, the last 50 years of experience in Indian students, revolutionary students' movements, and how they are related to the social movements in general and the people's movement led by Marxist-Leninists in Naxalite path in particular. I have prepared a small PPT PowerPoint presentation. I will take you through that, and in the end we can have a Q&A. I think I'll take about an hour or a little more for my presentation. It's about 15 slides, and then we can spend some half an hour on Q&A. That's how I am looking at it. Again, I thank you all for joining this program. Now we'll go to this slideshow. Basically, I have some 10, 11 different chapters in this, starting with the general introduction and then going to a brief history of Indian people's movements as a backgrounder, and then coming to Naxalbari upsurge and the various revolutionary movements in the last 50 years, then going to the student movement in particular and the legacy of left students movements, the parliamentary left student movement before Naxalbari, and then students in Naxalbari upsurge. Then how that students joining Naxalbari upsurge led to organization and consolidation of students into various forms and unions. And from there, what does this revolutionary student movement teach us? What are the essential aspects of this movement? And then what happened post 1990s, how the repression and globalization and fascism have led to an onslaught on the revolutionary students movement, and how the revolutionary student movement could not function in an open space on the campuses. And then in that vacuum where revolutionary student movement could not function uh, as they were doing in 70s and 80s, identity movements and various students outfits of identity organizations have taken place, and I will touch upon that and how they helped the social movement spread to various sections. And then to end, what is the present status in 2022, how the student movement, revolutionary student movement in India stands, and then we will end this discussion. What does this history teach us, and how, what lessons we can draw from this? This is basically my outline of the total presentation. Then coming to these, to introduce you to the present topic, first of all, why we are talking about youth and students as part of a revolutionary movement, revolutionary people's movement. The first thing is, youth and students, maybe because of their age, maybe because of their exposure, maybe because of their social relationships, and because of their education, because of their knowledge, their potential for a revolutionary transformation is much, much more than any other section. Most of you might have studied and understood that in 1960s, actually there were so many theories coming up saying that students are the most revolutionary section than even the proletariat. I would not agree that, but revolutionary potential of youth, revolutionary potential of students is on par with any other progressive sections, and they have more time and energy to. So that's why, if I would like to quote Mao talking about students. He said, the world is yours as well as ours, but in the last analysis, it is yours. You young people, full of vigor and vitality, are in the bloom of life, like the sun at 8 or 9 in the morning. So that is the revolutionary potentiality of the students. And throughout the revolutionary history, whether it is bourgeois democratic revolutions or whether proletariat revolutionary movements, students have played a considerable role, a qualitative role in almost all the revolutionary movements. But India offers a different picture, maybe qualitatively different picture, because we don't know any. There were some student groups as part of the Bolshevik movement, but there was no student organization. In Chinese revolutionary movement, starting with May 4th movement in 1919, and in 1930s against the Japanese invasion, there was student activity, but a student union, an organized student union, did not take place. Whereas in India, we have, for the last 50 years, in various forms, organized, planned student movements as part of the revolutionary movement. So that's why here I would like to share my experiences, because I worked in one of those organizations. I worked as working editor of a monthly magazine run by Radical Students Union in way back in 1984-86. So that's how, with my own understanding, with my own participation, I would like to share my experiences of students and revolutionary movement. But then it has the students' participation in revolutionary movements, however great their historical role may be in social movements, it has a lot of formidable challenges. The main challenge is that ruling classes always attempt to depoliticize the students and youth. They do not want students and youth take up social issues, join social movements, and mingle with the social activists. They create a lot of obstacles for students to join the social movements, to take up social issues, to be concerned with social issues at all. There are a number of obstacles. I need not list them. Some of them you might have seen in your own lives, in your own studies. Basic depoliticizing tactic of the ruling classes. Sometimes it is overt, sometimes it is covert, is careerism. They want all the students and youth to be careerists, to think about themselves only, to be selfish, not act on social concerns in a selfless manner. This careerism has been a challenge to the participation of students in revolutionary movements for a long time. Even now, even those people who were with revolutionary movement for some time, who led the revolutionary movement for some time, at one time or the other fall into this prey of careerism, and they will lose their contact with society. They will lose their social concerns and become, the next challenge is elitism. They will become elite. They will drift away from the social movement. They lose all their social concerns, and they also become part of the establishment. They become pro-establishment. They will also become part of establishment. And in our own experience, in the Naxalbari students' movement experience, we have seen a number of our comrades in arms, a number of our co-travelers later joining the establishment, and either joining academia and become careerists, or joining various business opportunities and become elite, or joining the establishment and becoming much more ruthless than the real establishment, the real ruling classes. Another challenge for students' participation, that obstacle that works as an obstacle on the students' participation, is casualness. Ruling classes want students and youth, for that matter, everybody in the society, to be casual, not to take serious any of the social issues. So by making them casual, I have been seeing this in my own experience, in my own world, post 1990s, with the globalization, with the onslaught of globalization and fascism. Many of our friends have become casual. They lost their seriousness about social issues, and this casualness is, I think, in Western society, this casualness is much more, because all your mass media, all your ruling class ideology is making you casual. And then in West, from US, I need not tell you, students and youth are the major prey for addictions, making them addicted to various non-social, making them into anti-socials, making them away from the social movements. Addictions are used, whether it is drugs, or whether it is alcoholism, or whether it is mass media, and everywhere these addictions are taking them away from the student activity. So that way, all of these we have experienced in our own conditions and challenges to student activism are very, very formidable. So here I would like to give how a radical students movement, a revolutionary students movement tried to avoid, tried to fight, tried to overcome these challenges to student activism, and it could withstand for some time, and with much more repression it could not withstand in public sphere, but still it continues. And these challenges, to understanding these challenges to student activism is very, very important to avoid them, to fight them, and to overcome them. Then actually student activism is the need of the hour in any society, whether it is US or whether it is Indian, because students are, as I told you in the beginning itself, students will be able to understand the society much more clearly than a peasant and a worker, because they don't have that much time. The peasants and workers are bogged down in their daily lives and they cannot read, they do not have time to read, they do not have time to attend classes, they do not have exposure, they cannot leave their work and mingle with people, exposed to various sections and understand. Whereas students have all these opportunities, and because of that, the social necessity of student activism is much more than any day in the present day. Actually, I would like to, in many of my lectures and essays, I have been comparing 1960s, where worldwide student and youth revolted against the status quo, revolted against the establishment, whether it is great proletarian cultural revolution in China, or whether it is anti-Vietnam War agitations movements in US, or whether it is students movements in Indochina, Mexico, Philippines, everywhere, or whether it is Naxalite in India. 1960s was a decade of youth and student activism. Angry 60s. I think 2020s. In 2010s, we have seen many of the movements, very many color movements all over the world. I think they are an expression of the discontent of people. In that expression, we may agree or we may not agree with their ideals. We may agree or disagree with their forms of struggle. But I would like to see all those movements in the last 10 years, 20 years as expressions of discontent among the people. The millennial youth have participated, a section of the millennial youth have participated in those movements. That section has to be enlarged now. This millennial youth have to join various movements against the establishment with the widespread discontent among the people. In hoping for that 2020s to become another angry decade, another consolidated struggle decade, I would like to give an experience of Indian student movement, how angry 60s led to this student movement, how the spirit of angry 60s and 70s continued for the next 40, 50 years. By showing that, by seeing that experience, I think one can take lessons, understand what can be done in their own particular context. Historical context, time and space are quite different. I can understand, I know, but those lessons can be applied, creatively applied, maybe changed if need is there, and a new student movement like that of 1960s or like that of from 70s to 2000s in India could be tried, experimented in every nook and corner of the world. That's what I believe. And for that reason, I would like to give a glimpse of in 1 hour lecture. We cannot completely understand the complete experience of Indian, a comprehensive understanding of the Indian student movement. But then a glimpse to make you, to prod you to read more, to understand it more, to analyze it more, and try to apply it in your own conditions. Before going to the student movement in particular, I would like to give you the context. In which social context, in which political context those student movements have evolved. First of all, India, before the entry of colonialism in 17th century, India was basically a feudal country under monarchs, kings, and landlords of thousands of acres or even lakhs of acres. For example, the place from where I come, the South Indian city of Hyderabad, was the capital of a ruler who had 5 million acres of land for himself. That was his private property. 50 million acres was the complete state, the area of his kingdom. And in that kingdom, he wrote for himself. In Urdu, it is called Sarf-e-Khas. The ruler was a Muslim king. In Urdu, it was called Sarf-e-Khas. That means land for private use, for his own family use. He took away 5 million acres of land. That kind of landlordism, that kind of feudalism was there till 1940, late 40s. This feudalism began in about 5th, 6th centuries in India with the direct approval and direct patronage of the state. So for 1,000 years or for more than 1200 years, this feudalism was there in Indian conditions. And there have been a number of movements against this feudalism, feudal practices, whether it was unpaid free labor, forced labor, or whether it is caste system that separates people, that divides people, or whether it is anti-women. Most of the patriarchal atrocities happened under feudalism. So for about 1,000 years, there have been a tradition of movements against feudalism in social consciousness, in the collective memory of Indian people. There have been a number of movements against feudalism. Starting from 1750s, 1770s, when by that time colonialism started gaining ground in India. They entered here in 1600, and by 1757 they could get power, political power also. Within a short time, by 1760s, it was the forest people, tribals, Adivasis. Here in our nomenclature, they are called Adivasis. That means aborigines. The aboriginal people have launched their movements against colonialism. So that stream also continued from then to 1947, about 200 years or 250 years of these anti-colonial struggles. In fact, given the Indian conditions, these anti-feudal and anti-colonial movements had to be merged, and a it could have led to a bourgeois democratic revolution. But the tasks of basic democratic revolution of land to the tiller, land reforms, and fighting against the patriarchal practices, fighting against the caste atrocities, caste division, all these tasks of democratic revolution should have been solved within this movement against feudalism and movements against colonialism. But by late 19th century, a collaborationist leadership planted by colonial rulers themselves entered the Indian movement, into Indian social movements, Indian national movements. And in India, colonialism strangely colluded with feudalism. And that is how the natural urge of people to fight feudalism was blunted. Colonialism, the struggle against colonialism was taken over by the agents of colonialism. That's how the aspirations of Indian people were ditched, destroyed, and in 1947, there was a transfer of power. The agents got the power and from the colonialists. And in the post Second World War situation, there was a campaign of decolonization. British wanted to leave India and they left India by giving their power to their own agents. And from 1947 till now, in the last 75 years, the same status quo is being maintained. There is no change at all. The same feudal forces, the same colonial agents, the comprador forces are ruling the country. And that is why India, as in the introductory remarks, Ryan has mentioned that in India we have a society and a state that could be characterized as semi-feudal and semi-colonial. In post-1947, there have been a number of laws, legislations against land consolidation, for land reforms, but none of the laws were implemented in the last 70 years. There was a law on land ceiling, how much land a landlord could own. It gave some 50 acres, some 27 acres, but even today there are landlords who own under various names, under fictitious names, under the exceptions given in the legislation, they own hundreds of acres. That kind of feudal force is still continuing. And feudal mentality, the feudal superstructure in the country is still intact. In the ruling classes are Brahminical, that is in the divided society of India, the top echelons are ruling the country now. And then till 1947, India was under one imperial power, one colonial power. Post 1947, it has become a playing ground for almost all imperialisms, and the internal squabbles between imperialist forces are being played out in India. And that's how, from being a colony till 1947, India has become a semi-colony from 47 till now. So this status quo, this establishment, this oppressive system has to be fought. There was every need to fight this system. And that is why in the last 75 years, there are a number of struggles of people against the status quo. There have been class struggles, though in 1951, I will come to that in detail in a minute. Though in 1951, Communist Party of India, the then Communist Party of India, officially withdrew its own armed struggle, peasant armed struggle, even then, class struggles continued post-1950s in various forms. Whether there may not be a political party till 1967 to lead the struggle, to guide the struggle, but class struggle in various forms, various manifestations has been continuing. Various sections of working class were fighting on their own demands, on their own betterment of life. Peasantry was fighting unorganized in various forms, and women were fighting for their own rights against patriarchy. Adivasis were fighting against their displacement. To give you one example, Adivasis constitute 8% of Indian population. Even today, they are about 10, 12 crores. But out of the projects, the so-called development projects, when 4 crore, that is 400 million, 40 million people were displaced, out of them 20 million were Adivasis alone. Because forests have the natural wealth, natural mineral wealth, forest wealth, and they were displaced. And Adivasis have been fighting against this displacement for the last 75 years. There are depressed castes in the caste system, in the social system that prevails in India. There is a group of castes which are treated as untouchables. Indian Constitution gave a name of them. They were put in the list of, in a schedule in the Constitution, and they are called scheduled castes. Even now, this untouchability continues in remote parts of the country. Outside, it may not be visible, but this caste oppression and caste discrimination continues, and because of this reason, there have been atrocities on them, and they are fighting against depressed caste, not only the lowest rung of our scheduled caste, but also the middle caste, known as backward caste, are also fighting for their rights. And religious minorities, if not the other religious minorities like Christians and Parsis, at least Sikhs in Punjab and Muslims all over the country are being discriminated against, and there are untold sufferings meted out to them, and they have been fighting for their rights, for their rightful place, for justice in this society. And nationalities, India is a country of multinational people. There are a number of nationalities which were never part of India and which had their own kingdoms, which have their own rules, and British suppressed them and merged them into British India. Even then, some of the nationalities did not join India, and post 1947, they thought, till 1947, almost all the political parties were talking in terms of self-determination of nationalities, giving freedom to nationalities once colonialists get out. But that did not happen, and there is much more suppression of nationalities all over India, particularly in the northeastern parts of India and in Kashmir. So there have been a number of struggles in the last 75 years of these nationalities. And like in Russia, a great Russian chauvinism, or like in China, a Han chauvinism, or racism in Europe and US, in India also, there is a discriminatory attitude against some regions, against some languages. One language wants to become a national language, suppressing all the other hundreds of languages in India. One region, the capitalists, the ruling classes of one region want to acquire the complete country, suppressing all the other regions. And against this phenomena, there have been a number of regional and linguistic struggles. Post 1970s, there have been a lot of development projects, and these development projects displaced millions of people, and they have been fighting against this displacement. And for environment, starting from 1980s, there has been a greater and greater awareness on environment and ecological issues, and they are also fighting. So, in a nutshell, India is a land of, as one BBC correspondent, Mark Tully, mentioned it, India is a country of million mutinies. There are a number of struggles of a number of sections of people. So that is the context in which we are talking about a student movement that coincides with, that runs parallel with these social movements. In this history, I have to add one more aspect before going into the students. Till 1967, from 1947, people were hoping that all our problems were created by colonialists, and once colonialists leave, there will be milk and honey everywhere. Our own rule will come, the self-rule will come, and in the self-rule, there won't be any scope for these problems created by colonialists. In 1947, India, in 1947, August 14th night at 12 o'clock, Jawaharlal Nehru gave a speech in the parliament, said that while the whole world is sleeping, India is waking up to its freedom. Everybody had that illusion. India was waking up to some freedom. But within 20 hours, all those illusions were demolished. There was no freedom. There was no liberty from the problems created by colonialists. So by 1960s, by mid-1960s itself, within 2 decades, there was a widespread discontent all over the country. On the one hand, nationalities were fighting in the Northeast. On the other, languages, particularly in southern part of India, people were fighting against Hindi. And in various states, students were fighting for their educational rights, and unemployed youth were fighting for employment. So by 1960s, India became a cauldron, and everywhere it was like a volcano. And in this widespread discontent, parliamentary opposition parties, though part of a clique of ruling class, they could gain. And in 1967 parliamentary elections, in 7 states, Congress lost power and anti-Congress, non-Congress forces came to power. This is one aspect. Second aspect, in 1951, as I mentioned you a little while ago, in 1951, the then Communist Party of India, the only party at that time, only Communist Party at that time, withdrew the armed struggle it was leading and joined parliamentary politics and said, in India, through parliament only, we can gain power. And at times, it even lost sight of seizing state power, and it was trying to make amends with the ruling classes. In 1964, that party got split, and a new section said the old party has become revisionist, and we will make changes, and we will bring revolution, we will work for revolution. But this new party also joined parliamentary stream, and within 3-4 years, it showed that it is not at all better than the old party. The first party, Communist Party of India, and the second party, Communist Party of India, Marxist, both of them, the so-called parliamentary left, have left people and started a class collaborationist tendency in the country. In that context, in the beginning, I told you about the worldwide international context of angry 1960s. That context, that anger was in the air, defiance was in the air, aspiration for revolution, aspiration for change, aspiration for social transformation was in the air, and that idea, coupled with the widespread discontent in the country and coupled with great proletarian cultural revolution, the great debate that demolished the established left, the parliamentary left, all these led to Naxalbari upsurge in 1967. In 1967, for the first time, the landless laborers under the leadership of, but that by that time, this leadership was with the second Communist Party, but they also left, they were expelled from that party, and they led the landless peasants, landless laborers to acquire the lands of the landlords, to harvest the crops that they grew. And within a short time, this Naxalbari, the idea of Naxalbari, spread like wildfire all over India. Immediately, at least in 10, 12 states, faraway states, there were echoes of Naxalbari, and Naxalbari line got established. Naxalbari is actually in the northeastern part of in eastern India, a remote corner of West Bengal. From that corner, this led to Kerala and Andhra Pradesh, and everywhere this Naxalbari line, the Naxalbari politics have taken place. What is the significance of Naxalbari? At least 4 or 5 I will touch upon, and from there I will go to the student movement. One thing, till that time, communist parties in India did not have a proper characterization of the country. In 1947 itself, the parties said it is a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country. This is not independence. This is only a transfer of power. But within months, it changed its stand. And for the next 20 years, it did not take up any class struggle, and it went on class collaborationist. Naxalbari characterized this country as a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country. Because, as I explained, feudalism was not fought and overthrown tooth and nail. Colonialism had understanding with, colluded with the feudal forces, and there is a mixture of feudal and colonial forces. So that is feudalism and capitalism, feudalism and financial capital, finance capital stage of imperialism have merged together to rule the country. That is how they characterized the country. And in these conditions, the tasks of democratic revolution have not been fulfilled. And now, as Mao said, it would be a new democratic revolution, but not under the bourgeois leadership. Democratic revolution under the leadership of the proletariat, under the leadership of the Communist Party. A new democratic revolution have to be fought in India. India's stage of revolution is new democratic revolution. That's why the parliament which is existing in this country is not a parliament at all. It is not a people's representative apparatus. So participating in parliamentary path and having illusions on parliamentary path is not to be done. and communists failed in the communist parties, the official communist parties have failed in that. So that's why boycott the parliament is the only slogan. That's what the Naxalbari line significance, the significant slogan that gave to the country. And that's why it launched an armed struggle to seize the state power. Till Communist Party was formed in India in 1920s. From 20s to 1967, it never had this seizure of power on its agenda. Only there were one or two exceptions, I will come to that, but for the first time, Naxalbari brought it back to the agenda, seizure of state power and an ultimate form of struggle as armed struggle. But then, as Mao famously said, in correcting one mistake, we tend to make another mistake. Naxalbari movement also made some initial mistakes. We will come to that. Because of that mistakes and because of the state repression, there was a setback. And from that setback, by 1972, there was a setback. And from that setback, there was a thorough review. And again, the Naxalbari line's essential features are needed, important, and significant. And keeping those essential features, it was continued in mass line. And that's how various formations of Naxalbari, I'm not talking about one party, there are many parties which claim legacy of the Naxalbari tradition. Some of them are doing good work, or some of them are not doing, but Naxalbari tradition continues.
Venugopal, we may have to go a little bit faster through the slides. I know it's very good to go through so thoroughly, but we're running out of time. Don't worry, you still talk for plenty of time, like another 30, 40 minutes, but it's almost been out. Sorry.
In next 6 slides, I think in half an hour I'll.
No problem.
Then, because we needed a context in which the student movement was taken up, I had to be a little more detailed. From here, I think it's not that much. Before going to the Naxalbari students movement, we have to at least have a glimpse of what was parliamentary left student movement before Naxalbari. Actually, in 1936, as part of the anti-colonial struggle, All India Students Federation was formed by communists. And in 1964, when the party was split, CPIM was formed. Student Federation of India was also formed in 1964. But both these parties, as well as student bodies, were tailing Congress in anti-colonial struggle and confining students to campus only. Students have to fight on their educational issues only. They should not mix their politics with social struggles. In a way, that was partial depoliticization of the students. Though in theory they were part of communist student movement, they were not allowed to participate in social struggles. That is because a faulty perspective of the party as well as the student movement. There are only 3 or 4 exceptions. Telangana, in this South India, Tebhaga struggle in Bengal, and Malabar struggle, Punapra Vailar struggle in present-day Kerala, Malabar. There was some exception where students participated in the movement, but on the whole, AISF was not in favor of students participating in social struggles. Even after post-1947 split, 1964 split, the same faulty perspective continued, and that's why the legacy of revolutionary student movement was not there for Naxalbari students movement.
Venugopal, I've received some criticism from the audience. I'm sorry to interrupt you. They're saying you should take your time and people will stay longer, so don't rush. I'm sorry.
Okay. Then In Naxalbari upsurge, when Naxalbari upsurge started, that was a remote part of Bengal. It's about hundreds of kilometers from Kolkata, but immediately it attracted students, and students from top elite educational institutions of Kolkata left their studies and went to the struggle areas to join the struggle. Not only from Kolkata, from Delhi, you name, in US, you may not be knowing the names of these institutions, but in India, they are very highly respected names. From those colleges, students left their studies and went to join the struggle. In Andhra Pradesh, from where I come, during those days, Naxalbari had an echo in Srikakulam struggle. That was a tribal area, the Adivasi area struggle. And students from almost all universities in Andhra Pradesh, then University in Andhra Pradesh, gold medalists, top ranking educationists left their studies, and students' enthusiasm to join the struggle was high in 67, 68, 69. Students' participation was very high. If you see, during those times, if 100 people joined the movement, naturally about 80 will be local people, but the other 20 were from student communities from far away places. That way, students' participation was there in the Naxalbari struggle, but it was unorganized. These students went and joined the movement as to give intellectual input, as well as they worked just like in Spanish Civil War. Many intellectuals and writers and artists went and were in bunkers and fighting with guns. Here in Srikakulam also, in Naxalbari also, students and intellectuals went and joined the movement as rank and file and as leaders and intellectuals. Most of them were killed in fake encounters. In India, we have a term called encounter, in which police catch hold of an activist, kill him deliberately, cold-bloodedly, and say that there was an encounter, they were coming with arms, we were also going in search of them, and in the skirmish that happened, they died. This is a usual story. This is called encounter deaths, and thousands of people were killed in encounters. And when I am talking about the first phase of Naxalbari, from 67 to 72, hundreds of people were killed, and out of those hundreds, at least a good number of students were also there. Noble sacrifice, they sacrificed with their life, and though the first phase of the movement suffered a setback, its significance is bringing back revolution back to the agenda of the Indian people. So students played a major role, leaving their studies, joining the grassroots movement, joining the forest movement. They brought back the revolution, the class struggle onto the agenda. There are at least 3 basic mistakes, errors of this phase, particularly with regard to students. One slogan was given to relinquish bourgeoisie education. They termed the whole education as bourgeoisie education and asked the students to leave that, to leave campuses, to leave education and join the struggle, join the people's movement. In fact, in student area, in every section of the population, in every section of society, there is a need for struggle, and everywhere we have to open all the fronts. But this education front was left alone, and almost everybody who was interested in the movement were asked to relinquish education and go to And at that time, Naxalbari had an erroneous idea that revisionism has come to India because of mass organizations. That's why mass organizations are not needed. We don't need mass organizations. It's only armed struggle party, and armed struggle itself will liberate the country. There is no need for separate mass organizations for working in separate sections of people. That's how student organization was given a go by. There was no need to form a student organization. There was no student organization formed during that time. And during that time, the party or the movement failed to be inclusive and pluralistic about forms of struggle. Where in a society, in a multi-layered society, in a pluralistic society, at the kind of India that we are living in India. So we need to have various forms of struggle. We have to work on various forms of struggle. We have to work on various forms of organization. But during this phase, Naxalbari did not realize that, and that's why student field, education field was left alone. Then, post 1972, because of the setback, there was a rethinking in almost all the rank and file and the leadership. And by 1972 itself, there was a rethinking. In this rethinking, first, in Andhra Pradesh and in Bengal and in Kerala, particularly these three areas, there was a rethinking, and leadership started thinking about forming mass organizations in various fronts. Students have to have an organization, peasants have to have an organization, women has to have an organization, various sections, we need mass organizations, and through that consolidation, through that organization, only the message of revolution can be spread to various sections, and only if that message is spread, we can build a stronger movement, a stronger struggle. And even for armed struggle to sustain, to continue, we need to have this kind of a rear force. That is the new idea that has taken place. And by 1972, in various parts of the country, student groups aligning with Naxalbari politics, supporting Naxalbari politics, spreading Naxalbari, propagating Naxalbari politics began. From 72 to 74, for 2 years, there were number of groups, particularly I know about Andhra Pradesh. I have written and studied Andhra Pradesh history. At least 20 different student groups were formed in various, at that time there were only 3 universities in Andhra Pradesh. But 20 different organizations were formed, and in 1974, the first of its kind organization called Progressive Democratic Students Union was formed in Andhra Pradesh, and it based on some theoretical and tactical questions, there was a big debate, and Radical Students Union was split away from that. The similar experiments are there all over India. But within a short time, within 1 year, in June 1975, emergency Indira Gandhi has imposed emergency, and in emergency, all the fundamental rights were suspended, and nobody could organize, nobody could speak, and 1 lakh people, 10 million people were arrested for being anti-establishment. In that time, RSU, by that time, Radical Students Union was formed. Radical Students Union wanted to evade arrests. They did not want to spend time in jail. So they said to get back to your villages. If you are from village, or if you are from urban area, you choose a village and go there. And going to villages, Charu Majumdar has given this slogan long back in 69 itself. But now In emergency, this came into fruition. Going to villages began. They went and organized peasants, agrarian labor, workers, and they also studied rural socio-economic structure. And with their own eyes, till that time they were only reading about it, they were only listening about it. But for the first time, they identified the exploitation and oppression being suffered by people in the countryside. So, post-emergency in 1978, Radical Students' Union conference in February 1978, they had a conference, and in that conference, officially the organization has given a slogan: you continue your studies for 10 months, but in summer, 2 months, go to villages. Various batches were formed, taking care that singers will be there, speakers will be there, women, half of the squad batch will be women. This batch of 10 students or 8 students goes to villages and speaks to them, understands them. So the slogan of "from the masses to the masses" given by Mao Zedong has come to India in its full meaning during 1978 to 85. It went on. Go to village campaign used to happen in every summer, because summer is a vacation, two months vacation for all the student or educational institutions in the country. So in those 2 months, during that time, I was, as I told you, I was editing the official organ of Radical Students Union, and I used to get hundreds of reports every year, hundreds of batches, hundreds of squads used to go to villages, and they used to send reports to the magazine. I used to edit all those magazines, and in 1 year, in 1984, I made a comprehensive report of all these. In that 1 year, 150 squads of students went to villages. These 150 squads had, all of them put together, 1,100 students. And there were some all women squads, all girls squads, and 105 women were there in these all women squads. And in that 1 year, 1984 alone, 2,419 villages were visited, and 50 lakh people, 5 million people were addressed and were given the message of revolution. That's how. So it was a humongous task. Go to village campaign is actually a landmark in Andhra Pradesh politics, and this similar experiment has taken place in different states. I don't have details of those states, but in Andhra Pradesh alone, during this period, 1978 to 85, there was a deluge of people struggles. Various organizations were formed. A youth league was formed. A peasant organization was formed. A coal miners organization was formed. A women's organization was formed. A peasant agricultural laborers organization was formed. So this kind of student activism leading to student activism guiding all the other social spheres has taken place before our own eyes. And because of this, the strength of Radical Students Union has grown manifold, and with this consolidation of student formation, by that time there were student formations all over the place. I am talking about only Radical Students Union. The similar experiences were there for at least half a dozen other organizations. All these student organizations were consolidated into an all India level revolutionary students organization, which is called All India Revolutionary Students Federation. So I need not go into the next 20 years, 30 years struggle, but what are the essential aspects of this revolutionary student? What lessons could be drawn and how it went into the rural grassroots areas? I will touch upon 5 or 6 basic lessons. One, this Naxalbari students movement, revolutionary students movement, brought back politicization to students. Till that time, students were weaned away from politics, depoliticized. But radical students movement, the revolutionary students movement, brought politicization, politics back to them. And like Mao said, politics in command, the idea of politics in command started percolating in student movement. Unlike the earlier phase of Naxalbari movement, they were not away from, they did not drift away from student politics, student issues. They were waging militant struggles on student issues, on scholarships, on hostel facilities, on syllabus, on teaching facilities, on the amenities in educational institutions, on ragging, various on patriarchal tendencies among the people, among the students, on caste discrimination among the students. Do you name anything within the student sphere, within the educational sphere also, every issue was taken up and militant struggles were waged. And any struggle on any issue should lead to political consciousness, raising political perspective. This was the idea of the revolutionary students movement. They did not confine themselves to campus alone. They fought on price rise issue of larger society. They fought on the mafia in urban areas. They fought on eve teasing, the so-called eve teasing of, that is a patriarchal tendency operating in the society. So they took up, not only confining to, they took up students' issues, as well as they did not confine to that educational institution alone, campus alone, they went into society. Their initiative was in almost all social issues. They led and they guided other sections of people. Trade unions, students went into trade union movement and they guided, they led trade unions, they gave ideas to the trade working class. In one word, they integrated, the students integrated themselves with revolutionary movement. This integration, not only in intellectual, theoretical ways, in practical terms, student movement has become a recruiting ground for armed struggle. Hundreds of students who, after working 1 year or 2 years or 3 years in the educational field, in the student movement, if their consciousness, if their understanding has grown to that extent, and if they are prepared to sacrifice their life, if they are prepared to sacrifice full time, unlike in part-time in student life, they joined the revolutionary movement as activists, as guerrillas, as rank and file of the movement, as leaders of the movement. And if you see now, in Indian revolutionary movement post Naxalbari has about 10,000, 12,000 martyrs. Out of that, more than 50% came from student stream, from student life, leading student life and student struggles for a few years, they joined the movement. For example, you might have heard the name of Azad, a Central Committee member, a Politburo member who was killed in a fake encounter in 2012. He was president of Radical Students Union in 1979-80. And later in mid-80s, he left and joined the movement. And until 2012, he was a significant intellectual force of the movement. I can give you hundreds of names like that, and most of them coming from, for example, Azad studied his master's in technology. He was a student of Regional Engineering College, Warangal, and later MTech in Andhra University, and then left and joined the movement. That way, many law students, engineering students, medical students, and general humanities, social science students, they left their studies and joined the movement, and they provided not only ranks, but the leadership also to the revolutionary movement. This phase, 67 to 72, one phase, 72 to 85 was one phase. But then post 1985, there was a three-pronged attack by the ruling classes on the student movement in particular, and on the overall social movements, revolutionary movements in general. In this three-pronged attack, one was a state violence, a direct state violence of killing activists or killing sympathizers. Second was an ideological attack in the form of globalization. And the third was another attack at the level of social society in terms of fascist tendencies. In 1985-89, there was a repression in Andhra Pradesh and all over India. In 85, central government in India brought an act, a draconian act called, legislation called Terrorist and Disruptive Activities Prevention Act, TADA. Under TADA, thousands of people were arrested and student leaders were also arrested. And in Andhra Pradesh particularly, no meeting was allowed, no organization was allowed. Speaking, writing, and singing were banned. So student union. And in 1989, till that time, in all educational institutions, there used to be a student union, a local students union. It's not a political students union, a union formed by students by voting. This kind of student union used to take up students' issues, but in 1989, in Andhra Pradesh, there was a ban on students' unions. Till then, in the next 40 years, till now, there is no students' union anywhere. During 1991, there was a small reprieve, but in 1992, Radical Students' Union was banned in Andhra Pradesh. That was the first ban of a students' union in all over the country, and later in other parts also, students' unions were either officially banned or unofficially various sanctions were imposed on them. A situation was created where they could not work. This was one aspect of the onslaught. The second aspect of the onslaught was much more covert, much more subtle. It was in the form of globalization. All the educational institutions were beginning to be privatized during 1990s. Till that time, in India, we had a private education and a public education. In the private, only Christian missionaries were operating, but not much of private education was there. Most of the education was public education, and public educational institutions were there. But as part of globalization, educational institutions started getting privatized, and private permissions were given for private sector, and that's how now more than half of educational sector is under private. in private institutions, it will be much more regimentation, much more official pressure, suppression of students' right in the name of discipline. And that's how student activity could not take place in these private institutions. That's how removal of politics from campuses began under this globalization phase, and that is being continued. Not only this, because of globalization, middle classes in Indian society have gained some, and they started sending their children to foreign countries for education, for employment, and that is how some of the middle classes, some sections of the middle classes started thinking that globalization helped them, and they started drifting away from political and social concerns, and a major support base of student movement and revolutionary movement eroded. The third one is starting with 1992, Babri Masjid demolition. Hindutva fascist forces have gained ground all over the world, all over the country, and within 20 years, by 2014, they could gain power at central government under Modi, and because of that, student activity, social activity, and revolutionary activity could not take place in the open, proper field. In this phase, there was a vacuum. Student activity under the guidance of revolutionary movement could not take place. But then this gap, this vacuum was filled by identity movements, students supporting identity movements. In India, as I told you in the beginning, there are various sections. The so-called untouchable Dalits are there. And because post-globalization, atrocities on Dalits have increased, various student forms with the name of Dalit Students Union or Ambedkar Students Union or Ambedkar Phule Students Union, Dalit Bahujan Students Union, various formations started taking shape. And in almost all the universities today, we have, if not revolutionary student movements, there is this Dalit Bahujan assertion and Dalit Bahujan student organizations. In a way, they are progressive, they have social concerns, they want a social transformation. And post Babri Masjid mobilization, Muslim students also started consolidating themselves, and some of it is radical Islamic movements, but then they are fighting the state, and in a way, there are some positive and negative aspects of that. And movements for regional aspirations and students joining these movements also is a major phenomena in the post-globalization in Central Indian states or in Andhra Pradesh. At that time, for a struggle for Telangana, separate state was formed and students joined that movement in large numbers. So that way, in the absence of or in the open invisibility of revolutionary students movement, student activism did not die. Student activism has not died, and various marginal sections are now taking up the banner of student activism, and revolutionary student forces, revolutionary student elements are part of, maybe invisible part or maybe indirect part of this marginal section student movement. Because these marginal sections, these movements, these identity movements do not have a class perspective, they do not have a social transformation agenda, because they have only amelioration of their own section, there is a negative aspect of this. Because they are not Marxists, they are not comprehensive social transformationists. that negative aspect is there. But the positive aspect is they are still holding forth. They are continuing the student activism. This is the present phase of the student movement in the country. Then, to put it in the nutshell, the present status, post-globalization, post-Hindutva in India, there is a growing onslaught of ruling classes on all sections. The crisis is growing. Economic, social, and political problems are a million mutinies are coming up, ever increasing unrest. If you open a newspaper on any day, if you watch a television news on any day, there will be one or other movement arising out of unrest, agitation arising out of unrest in some part of the country. So that means people are realizing, people are becoming aware of the need to take up more and more struggles. And state has become very vindictive. State is suppressing with brute force even a small skirmish, even a small movement of the people. But even when we are talking about widespread social unrest, widespread movements arising out of this unrest, it is all fragmented. People belonging to one section are fighting, and people belonging to other sections are not supporting them. Individual struggles, individual sectional struggles are going on. There is a fragmentation, and there is an absence of all-inclusive leadership and direction. In this situation, if only if an inclusive leadership, a pluralistic leadership, a class perspective leadership, a leadership that has a comprehensive understanding of society and social transformation takes up leadership, starts guiding these various sections, there will be a bright future. If that doesn't happen, there is, as Marx said in one of his famous, there is a tendency and there are counter tendencies. In Indian student movement, in Indian social movements, in Indian political movements, there are tendencies and there are counter tendencies. I, as a social scientist, as a journalist, cannot foresee the future, but I am optimistic, I am hopeful of a future where the tendencies of social movement, some tendencies of revolutionary movement, tendencies of revolutionary students movement gain upper hand, defeating the counter tendencies. Coming to my last slide, I'm sorry if I've taken more time. What does this history teach us? For everybody, not only for Indian, we from our own country, we are taking lessons, we are understanding, we are studying, we are analyzing this. But this analysis, these lessons, this study is not only confined to us. Everywhere, every other country can take, like we are taking lessons from anti-Vietnam war struggle. We are taking from Mexican student struggle. We are taking from Indochina student struggles. We are taking lessons from great proletarian cultural revolution. These 5 decades of Indian student movement experience, social movement experience, revolutionary movement experience also can be studied, and lessons could be drawn from this, from anywhere, from any society. I think this 5 decades of revolutionary student movement gave a particular lesson that student power is important, is essential for a comprehensive social analysis. Because of their exposure, because of their study, because of their time, because of their vitality, because of their age, they can go into society. They can visit villages, they can visit urban areas, they can visit any section of the population, and they can understand because their education gave their sharp analytical tools, and they can do a better social analysis. This has been proved in 1970s in India and in the next 4 decades also. Then, second lesson is student power is essential to spread the message of change. Change is the need of the hour. Every section wants a change. Every section wants a betterment of their life. Every section wants liberation. In India, we call it land, livelihood, and liberation. These three are the major. In India, we may have included this land. In other countries, it may be something else. But this land, livelihood, and liberation are the needs of the people. People want a change, and that message of change can be spread, can be propagated more effectively, more strongly with the aid of student power. The third lesson, I think, students, because of their forthrightness, because of their energy, they can help bring all the struggling forces together. Either in India or in any other country, maybe in US, there are various struggling forces. Blacks are fighting, women are fighting, LGBTQ are fighting, African Americans are fighting. There are different sections. Environmentalists are fighting. All these sections, there should be a bridge between them. That bridge can be built by students because of their time, because of their energy, because of their vitality. Student power can help bring all the struggling forces together to make a powerful, a formidable force. Then student power in itself can become an agent of change, a leader of change, a guide of change. With more resources and exposure at hand, as well as relatively lesser risk in countries like US, students in US can take up all these lessons to hone them, to fine-tune them, and to apply them in your own experiences, in your own struggles. Here I will stop, giving you some further reading tips. There are lots and lots of literature, but for the present, I will give 4 or 5, in my opinion, important books. One, Amit Bhattacharya, a professor of history in Jadavpur University, Calcutta, had written Storming the Gates of Heaven, a history of Naxalite movement. Second, Bernard de Mello, assistant editor of Economic and Political Weekly till recently, he had written India After Naxalbari, a very comprehensive book published recently. And for the first phase of from 1967 to 78 phase, Sumanta Banerjee has written a classic In the Wake of Naxalbari. It is also reprinted recently. You can get that. And as Ran has shown you, my own book about this part of the country, only Andhra Pradesh, Understanding Maoists. And APRSU has written its history, APRSU, A Glorious Saga of Student Struggle. It was recently published by Virasam, and I think that is also available. And these are all theoretical, historical experiences, non-fiction, but I would also request you to read one fiction, book of fiction. It is basically about student movement, a Chinese students movement against Japanese invasion in 1930s. It's called Song of Youth, written by Yang Mo. It's a very inspiring book on campuses, how students, how teachers react to social events, how they join social movement. I think that will inspire you. With that note, I would like to end here. Though I said I would take only 1 hour or a little more than that, I have almost taken 1.5 hours. I'm sorry for that. And then if you have any questions, if you already have typed it on chat box, Ryan will tell me, or otherwise if you can ask, and I think next 20 minutes or 30 minutes we can spend on Q&A. If you don't have any questions, you can later also connect with me on my email ID, venugopalrao@yahoo.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venugopal. And I think the audience was right. It was good to take a little longer and be more thorough. So I thought it was very good. Yeah, and I see someone saying that now. So I just wanted to start off with one question before going through some of the questions in the chat. You mentioned early on, and then you kind of reiterated some aspects of that point, the centrality and importance of students and revolutionaries more broadly, bringing consciousness and exposures and analysis of the larger society to the masses, the peasants and workers in the Indian context. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that and why that's so essential and why that doesn't happen spontaneously. Because in the US, with identity politics and the tailing of spontaneity, often there's a lot of confusion on that and the key role that people can play in going among the people, not only learning from them, but also teaching them. So sorry to go on, it was a long question, but I was hoping you could just talk a little bit more about that and how that's been important in India a little bit more.
See, human beings act spontaneously anytime. One need not go and teach them to act spontaneously against any injustice, for social betterment, for a social concern. People react on their own. But this kind of reaction is momentary. It will not lead to any consequence. It will at best reside with that person or that group only. That's why we need to consolidate reactions, guide reactions to have larger impacts, longer impacts, and to that you need to have organizational forms. Without an organization, without a discipline, without a long-term approach, an immediate reaction, a spontaneous reaction will not lead anywhere. It may be great, it may be massive, as we have seen in Arab Spring. Arab Springs, or even for that matter, the movements at 99, we are 99. These movements, because they did not think about the future in a long-term vision and the need for consolidating these lessons and results and future course of action. Almost all of them, whatever great effect they had in their contemporary periods, they could not be sustained. They could not continue. And this kind of continuation happens not from within. From outside, somebody has to see and analyze and to evaluate and to give leads. Students, why I am stressing on students is that students, because of their ability to read and understand and contemplate, and because of their time, because of their energy, because of their vitality, because of their outsideness of the social sphere, then it's a complex reality. It's not one, I'm not talking about only one aspect of it. Students in a complex reality are placed in a better position to understand, analyze, guide, participate. Academics all this time were teaching us to analyze or guide only. Indian students movement added participation to that. So I am saying it is studying, analyzing, guiding, giving future course of action, and doing all this not as an outsider, but as a participant. That's why in my book I said sociology has given this concept called participant observer. You observe and you also participate. They have given this for research purposes. I am giving this for movement purposes, taking the movement further. You as a student, you are better placed to be an observer. But as a person in society, as a responsible human being, you have to be a participant also. This is what I think. I don't know, Ran, whether I could answer your question, but what I immediately feel is this.
Oh, that was perfect. That really broke it down very well. Thank you. So I'm going to go through the questions, not necessarily in the order they were asked. So someone asked, in the 1980s, across the world, there was a lot of disorientation internationally following the counter-revolutionary coup in China. How is it the student movements in India managed to buck this trend in the 1980s? And how did they struggle with the international obstacles of the reversal in China and related rise of revisionism?
See, from 1979 itself, Indian revolutionaries were, particularly those who were guiding us, were thinking of capitalist restoration in China. And by mid-1980s, it was officially announced. So Chinese debacle did not discourage us, dishearten us as much as in other places. Maybe we had this experience of studying Soviet social imperialism, and it was not a shock for us. It was a shock for us in a partial way, in terms of we were expecting, because of the proletarian cultural revolution, it will not repeat, the Russian experience will not repeat in China. But we failed there. But that because of our understanding of Soviet social imperialism, Chinese experience did not hurt us that much. And mostly, apart from the international experience, international discouragement, we think our own social condition, our own social situation has driven us to take up more and more struggles and be active and be, because of, in practice only, in theory, whatever you think, practice makes you perfect. Practice guides you. Practice disallows you to drift away. That's how I think in 1980s, we survived.
Relatedly, there was a question about the struggle against revisionism back then and today. Since you've already talked a little bit about back then, could you talk a little bit about the struggle against revisionism today, both from the kind of more established CPM, CPI, but also some of the ML parliamentary groups?
See, most of the official left is discredited now. There is they have structures and properties and establishments, and they have one or two seats in here in assembly or parliament, but their voice has no credit in present day India. They are just namesake communists. There are some ML groups which are also active, but for them also, as I told you, the three-pronged onslaught, the state repression, globalization and fascism, though these official left and some ML groups did not have this first attack of state repression, state does not even touch them. But the other two aspects, globalization and fascism is against anybody who is progressive, not only against Maoists, not only against ML forces. Even Gandhian progressives are also being attacked by fascists. And globalization has drifted away middle classes from the struggle aspects. That way, even ML forces and official parliamentary left forces have lost their steam, and they are not even considered as major forces or forces to be reckoned with.
Thank you. There's a lot more questions. Maybe I just could add, can you add a little bit of context about the struggles against CPM in West Bengal, Surkaki, or not, sorry, Lalgar and Singar, and
yeah. Actually, in that all that happened in 2007, 2011 time space, CPM by then it was ruling for 30 years in that state, and within that 30 years they could not even do anything, leave alone revolutionary tasks, even social democratic tasks, even those tasks that can be undertaken under the constitution. They did not do anything. Because of that, they were discredited, and in that discredited state, this Lalgarh and Nandigram and Singur agitations have taken place, and it's with these struggles, it's almost demolished, and in the next election they lost, and now most of those forces, most of those CPM forces are joining Trinamool Congress, a ruling class party, and that shows that they don't even have that communist fervor, the namesake fervor within them. And in Kerala, now they have their rule. And in Kerala, if you go through the news, they are also implementing the draconian act of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, arresting people left, right, and center. And that means even now, even in this crisis period, CPM in Kerala, as ruling class, as ruling party, has not learned any lesson.
Not surprising. The next question relates to the situation for us in the US. Someone asked, what advice do you have for the youth in America in our struggle for socialism and communism? What steps should we take to bring us closer to revolution?
I think you are the better judge, but I can just give some suggestions from my own experience. See, as students, we did not know much about society. And because of that, our Go to Village campaign helped us to understand what kind of people are there, what kind of suffering they are undergoing, what is the kind of exploitation and suppression they are subjected to. This was first-hand experience. For as students, you also, I think you don't have villages, you cannot go to villages, but you have suffering sections, various sections. You have ghettos, you have working class neighborhoods, you have particularly Afro-American neighborhoods, you have various social sections which think they are meted out injustice. You can go to them, you can study them, you can understand the suffering, exploitation, and suppression firsthand. That gives you an empathy. That makes you work more harder, and that prods you, that drives you to study more, to understand more, to analyze more. And that, I think, from my own experience, I am telling, that makes you ask a question yourself. In this kind of situation, how can I help these people? How can I help these people liberated from this suffering? This liberation may be very, starting from a very partial, very limited, rigid aspects to the complete state power, the complete social transformation. It's a wide range. In this wide range, if you are, so to say, baptized into suffering, unless you get yourself baptized into suffering, you cannot understand what to do. It will not come from any book, it will not come from any lecture. It will come from experience alone, practice alone. That's why Marxist philosophy says practice is much more important than theory.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the next question is about the anti-colonial struggle and what could have been done different to avoid the co-optation by Congress and others, and what sort of things could have been done to have a more accurate analysis of what was going on in that period?
I would suggest Sunit Kumar Ghosh. You might have heard his name. Sunit Kumar Ghosh was, as I told you, he was a very great top-ranking student of presidency at that time, and he left that and joined the Naxalite movement, worked as an armed squad member, and then became editor of the organization of the magazine of the first phase. And post 75, he left politics, but he remained an intellectual, Marxist-Leninist intellectual. He wrote many books on his experiences, and along with that, he wrote at least 3 very good books that you can read. One is Indian Big Bourgeoisie. He explained why Marxist-Leninists are calling this a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country. It is a wonderful explanation of that characterization. And he also wrote India and the Raj, the history of colonial power in India and anti-colonial struggles. It's a great book that will give you. He says Indian national movement under the leadership of Congress was created by, actually, a British officer created Indian National Congress. It was created, though later people joined it, and there were some counter tendencies against the colonial ploy. But then basically its class character, its class nature was to serve imperialism, to serve feudalism. Knowing fully well that Communist Party, which was formed in 1921 or 25, started tailing with Congress. It could have said at that time, now with hindsight we can say, but we cannot cross-examine the dead. Communists could have said, could have launched their own independent anti-colonial struggle, anti-feudal struggle, and they could have entered into a pact, entered into a friendship treaty with Congress on some aspects, but not accepting Congress leadership, tailing behind Congress, allowing whatever Congress does to them also. This was the major mistake. The anti-colonial struggle could have been much more different, because there are, starting from 1857, Ghadar movement, Bhagat Singh, all the quote-unquote terrorist movements coming to Indian National Army, Royal Indian Navy mutiny. There are many anti-Congress, pro-people, genuinely anti-colonial, anti-feudal elements in the national movement. They were not. Communists could have captured them. Communists could have sided with them, but communists did not do that.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Jan Myrdal's work, India Waits, where he talks extensively about some of those mistakes. Quite helpful. There's another question on the how has the Naxalite movement divided work between the urban and rural organizing in the face of the huge urban growth in the wake of neoliberal policies? And the person notes, I believe in the primacy of the rural struggle, but also probably there's been some shift in increased focus in urban areas, is the question, in recent decades.
Yes, you are right. Urban work is not given as much importance as rural work and forest work. That is a mistake Indian revolutionary movement has to overcome. I am hopeful of that.
And could you just talk, for those who are unfamiliar, just a little bit about the Janatana Sarkars?
See, like in the liberated areas in Chinese revolutionary movement, in India also, first actually in 1980s, when the revolutionaries went to the central Indian forests, they thought it would act as a rear, it would act as a safe zone, it would help them to avoid repression in plains and urban areas. But slowly, in the next decade, they thought in this forest areas where Aboriginal people, the Adivasis, predominantly live, we can implement what kind of society we want to build, what kind of new democratic society, new democratic productive forces, new democratic productive relations we would establish. So with that aim, Janatana Sarkar, the rule of people, Janatana Sarkar is a Gondi word, which means Janatana is people's, Sarkar is governments, people's governance, that is rule by people. It started in mid-90s, and it still, by 2004, it became popular, and many people in Arundhati Roy went inside and wrote a book, and at least half a dozen books have come on Janatana Sarkar. Some of them are in English, you can read them. It is a model state or a future state in the making. It's a people's state. People participate in all decision makings. People participate in production. People participate in self-defense. People participate in expansion of the movement, enlargement of the movement. And armed squads do the production work. Armed squads protect people, and villagers, Adivasi people form militias among them, and they protect their own villages. And there is a lot to talk about Janatana Sarkar. One major achievement Janatana Sarkar could achieve, I could tell is that starting from 2004 till today, Government of India and state governments of these 4-5 states have entered into MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, with a number of multinational corporations, allowing the multinational corporations to come and dig the mineral wealth in these areas. None of them could be implemented because of Janatan Sarkar. Not even a single MNC could enter. Some MNCs who entered before this period are still working there, but under the conditions laid down by the Janatan Sarkar. No new MNC was allowed inside this. And Jan Myrdal's Red Star over India or Jangalnama by Satnam, and a Telugu writer, poet, Pani, who visited the place and wrote about 500-page long text on discussing all these things. Right now it is in Telugu and it is going to come in English shortly. All these books will give you a glimpse of what is happening there.
Yeah, and just to add the significance that these MNCs, they're not just trying to bring in the developments to clear cut the forest and pull out the mineral wealth by themselves. There's 500,000 troops and paramilitaries there that are working at their behest. So to sustain a liberated area for the people in the wake of, in the face of that is quite something, quite an accomplishment, I think. So we still have a number of questions. I know it's been 2 hours, but if you have time, Venugopal, we'll do a few more.
See, if the questions can be sent to me and I can answer, and it's already 9 for me. I have to go out. It's already 2 hours. Sorry.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time, Venugopal, and for your excellent presentation and the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you all.